Want to take a guess as to what we're talking about today? I grew up watching some of the classic Godzilla movies. Movies like Godzilla vs. Gigan, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. There's one where he melts alive, I think. And no, I have not watched all of the Godzilla movies. Fucking sue me. I'm still pretty confident in my assumption that Shin Godzilla is the best, and when I eventually get around to watching all 38 of these films, maybe I'll change my mind, but something tells me that Son of Godzilla won't exactly be a heavy hitter for me. In case it's not obvious yet, I will be spoiling the plot to the entire movie, along with a lot of the meanings that I personally took out of it, so to the people who still won't click off of this video without seeing the movie first, consider yourselves stupid, but warned. God, where do I even start? Okay, I've got one idea, I just don't think it's a very good idea. Okay, so this movie opens up with a boat named the Glory Maru. We don't know who owns that boat yet, but we do know that there's a map with its exact position marked on it, an origami crane, and a note. And then this huge explosion happens right next to the boat, and that's when we meet our main guy. Not Godzilla, Rando Yaguchi. He has some kind of governmental position, I don't know. If you've seen this movie before, you know just how many moving pieces there are, and the sheer amount of characters gets pretty overwhelming. The directors intentionally throw a lot of different names at you, including character names, government positions, fucking military vehicle names, like all of it's to showcase that there's quite a lot of bloat within bureaucratic systems. So trying to remember individual positions in government just will not happen. Fucking cry me a river. So during a meeting to discuss the explosion, Yaguchi brings up the fact that it may be a sea creature, but he's promptly laughed at and told to shut the fuck up. But of course, this is when a giant tail comes out of the water and starts doing a bunch of tail things. But it's okay, Mr. Prime Minister Man gathers a bunch of experts to try to figure out what this thing could be, but most refuse due to fears of career suicide. But there is one expert, Hiromi Ogashira. Hiromi White. Do I really need to show my white? But eventually one expert, Hiromi Ogashira, says that it's pretty improbable that it'll ever come onto land because the sheer size will just... Okay, editing Xander here.
Hiromi
Correctly predicts that the creature can come up onto land, and then some other random guy after the fact says that it probably won't. I got it mixed up. I am stupid. And with that information, the Prime Minister decides to hold a press conference to try to calm the public down. But Rutro Raggy looks like you've got a fucking alien fetus roaming the streets of Tokyo. Okay, well, actually, that's Godzilla. Second evolution. Stay with me now. After a lot of wasted time and stupid meetings, the creature just stops dead in its tracks for about 5 seconds. And then it gets back up, starts growing stubby little arms, thicker legs, and tougher skin. Looks like that guy just evolved into its third form just to live on land. The military is finally called after a bunch of kaiju destruction, but oh no, looks like there's a couple of dumbass civilians in the line of fire, so I guess we can't fire. And before you can call those civilians a bunch of Tylenol munchers, Godzilla just scurries off back to Tokyo Bay and disappears. I think that this movie has a really strong opening. I find that a lot of Godzilla movies, especially more modern ones, tend on holding off the kaiju until much later in the story. But Shin Godzilla, it knows that it's a Godzilla movie and the entire plot revolves around him. And it's really refreshing. There are themes other than, you know, big giant lizard, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And damn dude, when I first saw this movie years ago, I mean, seeing that second evolution walk on land was a fucking shock. Not because it was walking on land, but because fucking look at it. The design is so gross, I just can't look away from it. The bulbous eyes, the huge bleeding gills, the diarrhea-colored skin, and the arm nubs make it look like anything but Godzilla. It's only when you see the creature evolve that you realize that, yeah, it is Godzilla, and quite a formidable one at that. I just think it's a really well-executed subversion of expectation. Huh. This is where the movie shifts in tone a little bit, and by a bit, I mean a lot. The opening was all about disaster recovery, public panic, and, well, a giant monster roaming throughout a city. This part, however, is all about government bureaucracy and trying to figure out Godzilla's nature. The government decides to put together a team of nerds, lone wolves, troublemakers, outcasts, and the such in order to gather as much information on the creature as possible. Yaguchi obviously was chosen to lead this team, and that lady from earlier, who falsely predicted that Godzilla would not come up onto land, is also part of the team. There's a lot of characters here, but really all you need to know is that there's a bunch of people within the Yaguchi team. Now that same lady from earlier actually proposed the idea that Godzilla might be getting its immense amount of energy from nuclear fission. She's scoffed at until she's proven right the very next scene. It's a good enough trope to use twice, I guess. And soon enough, the bigwigs from across the pond catch whiff of all this monster and
powered by fission talk and eventually decide to send some help.
Yeah, go get him, Dwight.
Meet Kyoko Ann Patterson. Definitely a real American with an authentic American accent.
Are you okay?
Now, Patterson offers a trade with the Japanese government. The US would hand over everything it knows about Godzilla if the Japanese government decides to hand over everything that it knows about this guy named Goro Maki. Hold on to that name, it'll be kind of important. Once the exchange happens, the Japanese government learns that the American government named the creature Godzilla. Thanks for the name, I guess. The Americans also handed over a bunch of research that Goro Maki had on Godzilla. A bunch of theorizing eventually leads to the team thinking that Godzilla may have ran back to the bay for cooling purposes. And if it operates anything like a nuclear reactor, then maybe the team can inject a bunch of blood coagulant into Godzilla to slow his fission reaction and ice his ass. So the team submits the plan under the name Yaguchi Plan. The naming conventions in this movie are fucking immaculate, I know. I won't lie to you, this movie has a bit of a pacing problem. The intro was jam-packed full of Godzilla action and destruction, but after that it was a bunch of sitting in offices trying to figure out how to kill the damn thing. I don't mind it too much just because I think the whole idea of Godzilla existing at all is pretty cool, and watching the team slowly figure out the puzzle is also pretty neat, though it is definitely a tonal shift. Thankfully though, we don't have to wait for much longer. And just in time for it to be inconvenient, Godzilla shows back up. But like, bigger. A lot bigger. This is Godzilla's fourth evolution. And as you'd expect, the government shits its proverbial pants as the kaiju starts doing what it does best. Walking. Menacingly! After evacuations are complete, the military finally uses force, but nothing is effective. The fucking missiles, the bullets, everything. Nothing works. If only they did something about it sooner. After numerous failed attempts by the military, the government eventually starts to evacuate larger areas of Tokyo, and also starts to scram out of there too, because fuck being around that thing, dude. Do you see that? And while the Prime Minister is fleeing, he's informed that an American B-2 bomber squad is gonna try to attempt to take out the beast. And surprisingly, the bombs dropped actually seem to damage Godzilla. If it bleeds, he can die, am I right? Well, Godzilla proceeds to fully open its mouth and split its jaw open before vomiting like a cat on clean bed sheets. This vomit gets a little bit wacky and decides to kill the Prime Minister and all of his cabinet. Whoops. After Godzilla goes into EP bedtime mode, Yaguchi is left in the ruins of Tokyo and a shattered government. I actually want to take a second to just gush about this scene, and yes, I know that it's everybody's favorite part of the movie. Just shut up and let me talk about it, you recessive chromosome. I knew that this wasn't a typical Godzilla movie when I first saw this scene. I mean, duh, his damn jaw decided to open up enough room to fit the Holy Ghost in there. But in every other depiction of the monster, he's either some anti-hero or a creature with hatred for humans. But Shin Godzilla? He just exists. And sure, Shin's design is terrifying to look at, but there's not any emotion in there. I mean, he's not destroying Tokyo just because he wants to, it's just a byproduct of his evening stroll. It harkens back to the original 1954 Godzilla, which this movie clearly took a lot of inspiration from, down to the very opening of this film. I guess we didn't have the oxygen destroyer, which I guess we really missed out on that one. It's only after the US finally broke skin that the monster unleashed its actual carnage. It had a defense mechanism, not some fire breath to destroy humans, but a focused beam to protect itself. It's actually shown later in the movie, while he's still asleep, that he still has some capacity to defend himself. It's almost like he's building a tolerance to humans.
Breaking news. Downtown under siege.
An unknown creature began to wreak havoc on local businesses earlier today. We interviewed a couple of eyewitnesses to try to get a sense of what we're dealing with.
Well, this tiny little lizard came over and just bit my fucking leg right off. I mean, it grew back, but that's not the point.
So I saw this creature run into the store. I was just minding my own business, and I saw him, and he just grabbed him, and he swung him around, and he took this other guy, and he twisted his dick off, and... Am I getting paid for this?
So far, the creature has not been caught on tape, and no description has been relayed to us at this time.
Shit. And while I'm at it, can I just say that the design of Shin is perfect? I know his form changes throughout the entire movie, but his fourth evolution is just perfect. And while he looks completely different to every other iteration of Godzilla, Shin's design just looks deformed and in pain. And to speed run through the end of this movie a little bit, Yaguchi and his team need to figure out a way to stop Godzilla before he wakes up again. The Americans send some help in the form of some scientists, but all they really end up doing is snitching that Godzilla is an unstoppable nuclear monster that is capable of mobilizing to the US. So with that information, America decides to petition members of the UN to drop a nuclear bomb. Because when something seems unbeatable, you might as well just throw a nuke at it, right? Ugh. Obviously, the Japanese don't like this plan, firstly because Tokyo would just end up becoming a contamination zone with millions of displaced people, and second, well, I don't think I need to explain why dropping a nuke on Japan a third time is a bad look. And with most UN members agreeing to the boom plan, Yaguchi and his team are running out of time. They begin to work in overdrive and they finally come up with a plan thanks to the research and clues that Goro Maki left behind from earlier. They figured out that Godzilla's DNA is three-dimensional and folds in on itself, kind of like an origami crane. I wonder when we saw that one before, huh? So with that information, they finally know what kind of blood coagulant they need to mass produce. Tons of people from all over the country also decide to pitch in and help in any way that they can. And just days before the scheduled nuke detonation, the Yaguchi plan is finally underway. They utilize trains, bombs, unconventional physics, and a bunch of courage just to inject a bunch of goopy stuff into Godzilla's mouth. Why do I make things gay? What the f? And once they finally pass the targeted amount of coagulant, Godzilla kindly stands back up before freezing in place. So now we've got this rad as hell statue in the middle of a decimated Tokyo. After reflecting on the work done and realizing that the spirit of the Japanese people will prevail no matter what, we get a close-up look at Godzilla's tail. And yeah, that's the end of the movie. Godzilla was defeated and the government proved that it can overcome itself to get the job done. Beautiful. Now we all know that Godzilla is famous for being an allegory about the nuclear bombs dropped during World War II. And since Shin Godzilla is pretty much a recent rendition of the classic monster, it represents something a little more modern.
Tonight, a special edition of World News: Disaster in the Pacific.
Japan, a massive history-making earthquake, one of the largest ever measured.
Then, the tsunami. Roaring as fast as a jumbo jet, crushing everything.
Nuclear plant in trouble. The aftershocks continue. The world is watching Japan.
March 11th, 2011 is a day that will forever live in infamy for the country of Japan. A massive 9.1 magnitude earthquake struck about 45 miles east off the shores of Sendai. The quake resulted in tons of structural damage to the surrounding area, and about 10 minutes later, a huge tsunami made landfall. Some initial waves were reported to be about 13 feet high and had enough energy to reach 133 feet above sea level.
For reference, think about a wave twice the size of me reaching the height of this building.
The scale of the destruction is hard to put into words. At least 101 designated tsunami evacuation points were destroyed from the waves in Sendai alone. Almost 20,000 people lost their lives due to the earthquake and tsunami that day, but the destruction did not stop there. About 60 miles down the coast from Sendai, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant experienced the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. The tsunami waves damaged the cooling pumps, causing 3 reactors to go supercritical and explode. The exposed cores started leaking radiation to the surrounding countryside and seawater. 200,000 people were forced to evacuate from their homes and flee due to the danger that the now ruined power plant posed. Thankfully, however, nobody died as a direct result of radiation exposure, but the fallout has toxified a large chunk of land, and it's hard to know the long-lasting effects of an incident of this scale.
I apologize for the shift to a more serious tone there, but Shin Godzilla represents a disaster. This disaster. Just as his grandfather represented the horrors of nuclear war, Shin Godzilla represents unprecedented natural disasters and government incompetence. There is a not-so-subtle commentary about government bureaucracy and its major downsides in this movie. The Japanese government was heavily criticized for its handling the situation during and after the events of 2011. The movie really plays up the sheer incompetence and showcases just how slow a government response can be to a major natural disaster or a giant radioactive monster. I think Shin is a perfect representation of this disaster. He starts out as some kind of freak of nature, but slowly over time, the issues start to become more and more human. It becomes a matter of human incompetence rather than just a natural disaster. As entertaining as Shin Godzilla is, it's hard to avoid what he represents. But now, let's talk about the movie a little more. Remember when I said Goro Maki would be an important name to remember? Well, guess what? He's important. Maki was a Japanese biology professor who was expelled from his homeland after his wife died due to radiation sickness. Not much is said about why he was expelled, but I think it had something to do with his outrage towards the government after his wife died. During his expulsion, Maki traveled to America and worked with an American energy company to study mutations caused by unregulated dumping of radioactive waste. While he continued his research, Maki discovered a new life form, one that evolved to consume radioactive waste. Can you see where this is going yet? Once the US government caught wind of his research, they prevented his findings from being published and also renamed it. That's why the Americans wanted to know everything they could about Maki in exchange for giving up his research. But obviously, Maki was outraged. I mean, the man lost his wife due to radiation sickness, due to government incompetence, and now his life's work is being covered up by yet another one. Dude had it rough. So with nothing left to lose, he went back to Japan and boarded his boat, Glory Maru. And on that boat, if you remember, there was a map with its exact position marked on it, an origami crane, and a note. The map tells us that Maki planned to be exactly where Godzilla first emerges. The origami crane refers to how Yaguchi's team eventually figures out the puzzle of Godzilla's DNA. And the note read, "I did as I pleased, now you do the same." Clearly, Goro Maki had something to do with unleashing Godzilla upon Tokyo. How he did it is still a mystery, but I did hear a theory at one point saying that maybe he merged his DNA with that of Godzilla's, thus making him capable of evolving to live on land, as well as giving him that humanoid form. And his little note was probably directed at the government. My own personal theory is that the line, "now you do the same," is a jab at the bureaucratic bloat within politics. If Maki truly understood what he was unleashing, then the government would certainly face destruction if they kept doing as they pleased. I wish the plot explained Goro Maki a little bit further, because if I'm being honest, it's kind of a weak plot point. There's a lot of interesting lore behind him, but he's barely mentioned throughout the entire movie. I mean, he's directly responsible for unleashing Godzilla, and yet I didn't even realize that he was until my third time watching the movie. I'm a slow reader, okay? Shut the fuck up. Goro Maki might have not had a lot of screen time, but his character is pretty important to the overall metaphor for the entire movie. He represents the millions of outraged people towards the Japanese government for not doing enough during an unprecedented natural disaster. He wanted change from within, and the only way to do so, in his mind, was to create destruction at an unprecedented scale. And believe it or not, Godzilla wasn't supposed to stop when he did. The final shot of the movie alluded to another evolution in which small Godzilla drones would peel off from his tail and start attacking at a more human level. Just as he evolved to live on land, he was starting to evolve to survive human attacks. And according to sources like the art of Shin Godzilla, he planned on taking the evolutions even further. His fifth form would have been able to self-replicate and be capable of flight alongside having his humanoid drones. His sixth evolution would overcome the need for water and atmosphere and just travel to other planets. His seventh form would be able to create a universe within its own fucking body. And his eighth form would have transcended the laws of physics, essentially becoming a god. The amount of money that I would pay to see this would double the GDP of a small African country. I'm looking at you, Burundi. The fact that Hideaki Anno planned the plot to go even further just meant that there probably would have been a whole Shin franchise. And you know my ass would have been on board for that. Part of me wanted to include all the flaws and, talk about all the critiques of this movie, but that's not really the point of this video. The only reason why I wanted to make this video is because I wanted to talk about how good this movie's message is. Shin Godzilla received mixed reviews in the States, and I can totally understand why. But a lot of people miss the context and the overall theme. People are used to seeing a giant radioactive dinosaur take down yet another giant radioactive dinosaur with lots of destruction in the process. But this is different. Yes, there is good old-fashioned kaiju destruction in this, but Shin Godzilla is, by definition, a monster. A cruel and uncaring monster whose only purpose is to exist. And humans just happen to be in the way of that. Shin was Goro Maki's test to the Japanese government. If they couldn't deal with blatant danger, then what use were they to the entire country of Japan? We can never truly prepare for the absolute worst. All we can do is figure out how to get through those difficult times and maybe prolong the inevitable. And if we can't even do that, then maybe our destruction really is guaranteed. Thanks for watching.